Hello, and welcome back to Parley. This prompt is from Hank. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about the tension, or lack thereof, between involved games, perhaps sophisticated build systems, and relaxation. Thank you for the prompts. Well, you're very welcome. Yes, this is one of mine. I've added a sort of new feature to Parley. You pay your $9 a month, you can get whatever prompt you like, but I don't want you to feel like you need to think of a prompt. If you want a podcasty thing, Parley, that is about something you're more interested in. So, from now on, I will also provide some prompts of my own, as many as we need. I'll put in a few, and then if they're used, I'll put in more. And so, in any given month, you can prompt whatever you want. And a lot of people do. But if you want to use your slot and you just don't have an idea, you can still get a Parley. You can take one of my prompts, fiddle with it, or just copy one of them. That's fine too. These are things I wanted to think about anyway, so you're not exactly doing me dirty. I've got plenty to say about them. It's not going to be harder or easier or whatever. So they're there if you want them. If you have Parley and you're interested in using these, they're in a pinned comment. So just click the pin icon on the Parley channel and you'll get a whole bunch of prompts from me that you can use or just use for inspiration if you want to. You're still free to request whatever the heck you want, but you have the option of using those now too. So this one is from me. Obviously, that means I'm even more on the spot prepared, but it's a problem I've been having. That's the trade off. A lot of them will be things that I was kind of stuck on. Like, I sort of don't know what to respond to that prompt. So we're going to try to figure it out. Here's the problem, or what I see as the problem. I, for a living, spend a lot of time talking about the area of the gaming industry that is full of games with involved build systems, as I call them. Systems to make a playstyle or a build in a game. And the result is that these games are usually relatively complicated. They don't feel pick up and play in a way where they have, one mechanic and then you add build modifiers to it. Now, they can be, some of them are, some examples like Downwell come to mind, where that game doesn't have a very robust build system, but you do get upgrades as you go after you fall through a certain amount of the well. You could make a game that had mechanics like that. You literally just fall, and then you have a jump button that fires your gun boots, and if you bounce off enemies, you reload them. Basically no controls, very simple to pick up and play. You could have a game like that where you had involved build systems, but this just isn't common in my experience. There are games like that. Another one that comes to mind is SNKRX, Snakers is what I call it. SNKRX. This is basically Snake, but your snake is a line of tower defense turrets, and you pilot your snake around and you shoot enemies as they come in, and it's a roguelike. There are games in this. I'm looking at my recently played games just in November and December that are really simple, that are these crisp, easy to pick up and play types of games. They exist, but I often find myself feeling like when I sit down to play something in the evening to maybe unwind a little bit, I have this hesitancy to pick up most of the games that I want to play, especially games that are on my list I want to try. I own them, they're ready to go, but I feel like I shouldn't boot that game up. What's going on? Well, the first response I would give you is that it's because I'm hesitant to overwhelm myself. I feel like it's going to be a lot of mental load or work, or I'll become more mentally tired. And I guess I just feel like when the reason this is a topic I posted is that when I actually do try those games and just ignore that feeling and just play them anyway, I feel better. But I still have this impulse or reflex to not introduce more of those games. What is going on? How can I fix this thing? And as I thought about this for the past, month or so, I noticed that my friends also do this thing. Of course, they don't ignore it. They think, oh, well, I don't want to get into that right now because it's really involved. But I wonder how they'd feel if they just did anyway. I'm not saying they're all wrong. I mean, we don't know, really. That's the problem. But what's going on here? You see what I mean? So, as I said in the prompt, the tension or lack thereof between more involved games, it might be build systems, might be something else, and relaxation. Is it actually effective? You could reword the question to avoid games that have more involved mechanics when you want to relax. I think the first step that will be useful is to define relaxing versus restfulness, relaxation versus restfulness. because I think that might be part of what's going on. I have a reflex to not want to overburden myself mentally, but part of my discomfort and anxiety is coming from not getting to do the things I want to do, which feels similar but not quite the same. It is coming from being tired. But is it really that I'm so mentally exhausted I don't want to do anything? Or is it just that I'm feeling mentally lazy and I think I should ease off of things in general, but I would actually be reinvigorated by enjoying a little bit of mental stimulation? You know, my brain is tired of monotony or struggling with the same problems rather than being tired of everything, all thought. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to tell anybody else that they feel one way or the other, but for me, I think there is a question there. If you asked me that, you're my therapist, and you asked me this right now, I would say, huh, I don't know, actually. I think it's that I certainly need more mental rest, but there are kind of two different kinds, don't you think? And so relaxation you might call not struggling with the same mental problems that you were on during the day, or struggling with serious mental problems. And then restfulness you might call ceasing most mental activity, like reducing the total brain activity, I don't know, going on, not just shifting it to a different, maybe low stakes type. And so for the rest of this parlay, I will try to use relaxation to mean you're still doing something mentally active, perhaps, but it just isn't something like of stakes or a problem you were stuck on, you know, during the day, let's say. Whereas restfulness is like going to sleep, watching a TV show, you know, that actually could be fairly intense, but, you know, you could find something lighthearted. And so maybe my brain is thinking that I need rest, but I actually need relaxation. And I would find these games with these involved build systems or game systems relaxing, but not restful. And I've misidentified that I need rest when I actually, it would be okay to just get relaxation, which these games would give me. So, kind of like a defense mechanism, you might even say, to not get involved in more things that are really complex. And I think that's part of where it's come from for me, is to not overly introduce too many things into my life that I'm juggling all at once. It's definitely hard to keep up with games that have a whole system to their builds when you have like three or four other games that you're chewing on like that. I do think that for build systems, at least, getting kind of orientation out of the way, where you get up to speed with the game's build systems, you play, you know, a chunk of runs or a good block of the game, and you just get kind of comfortable in that space. You can kind of keep track of when that feeling is done, and then that game has sort of ceased to be a burden. I definitely don't want to learn multiple games build systems at the same time, in the same day, or at the same night. So sure. But how long does that really take? Well, recently I started playing a lot more of Chrono Arc, which you'll hear plenty more about. It's going to be on my build system of the year list. I think it's awesome. And I would say that it took me, I played a lot of it for most of a couple of nights in a row. It probably took me the better part of half of a week of free times in the evening, I guess, to get up to speed with it. For this particular game, Steam says that I have 16 hours played. I would say it's not really about the amount of hours, of course. It depends on the game's pacing. This is I think, relatively more complicated game mechanically. It also has kind of unusual mechanics, like a lot of things that are not that similar to other relatively similar games. So all that stuff might be a factor. I don't want to say an amount of time that much. But as an idea, you might say, well, maybe give it a week between new build systems. If you get a lot of time to play it in your free time in the evening or whatever, or on the weekend, maybe give it a week between each of those. I think the beginning of breaking down this idea that these games that I enjoy, that I find pleasant, relaxing to spend time mentally chewing on, the beginning of deconstructing the idea that those are going to make me feel exhausted when they kind of don't, when I just like don't worry about it and play them anyway, is to try to find rules for myself that say, well, if you follow these rules, logically it should be fine. And then if you are tired, just stop playing the game. That's fine. But don't hesitate to even start if all evidence points to the idea that it'll be fine and you're following your logic rules. So I think the first one is, yeah, maybe not multiple at once, not multiple build systems at once. I had a video from a few years ago that I'll probably redo because I just don't think I was good at making that kind of video at the time, but I think it's a really useful idea. It was called Playstyle or Buildcraft Vacations, basically. The idea that having different modes of game on your docket, I don't know, ready to go at the same time can be really helpful so that you have something ready to go that you're up to speed with, maybe a new thing if you're feeling bored, you want something different, and then maybe something that's just really, really light or maybe really more involved. I would say in that video, I kind of delineated three-ish categories, and I kind of disagree with that evaluation now. They became my categories that I use in my game spreadsheet: a campaign based game, an ongoing game, and a session based game. But I don't think those are very useful categories for fitting a game into your life necessarily. I think it's maybe more like a game you are early on in, a game you have an established presence in, a game that has a story focus, and a game that is mechanics light would be maybe the four that I would want around. Now, if you keep up with any ongoing games, a live service, or maybe it's just a multiplayer game you and your friends are comfortable with a lot, I feel like that can fit one of those. You know, you have one of those checked kind of forever, unless you run out of those. A couple light live service experiences could basically keep that category checked indefinitely. I have right now Warframe, Arknights, Limbus Company, and also the finals. And I've been interested in getting into Supervive a little bit as well, and Remnant 2 as well, that I play with a co-op group. Though that one I probably wouldn't play myself that much. And so I've got a nice handful where if I just want to play something I'm up to speed with and it's not particularly strenuous to like go do something and get something done, I can enjoy my hobby with like basically no increase in mental load. And for many of those activities, I can play it in a way that is harder if I want to. Use a weapon I'm less comfortable with in the finals. Play the more challenging parts of Limbus Company or Arknights. In Warframe, I can poke into Deep Archimedia or Netrocells or Archon, what's it called? Sorties, if I wanted to. So those do that very well. I think having games like that established, great. And I have some games that I'm chewing on, but I'm up to speed with. Like parts of Remnant 2, I could get the DLC and start chewing on that. Hades 2 Early Access, I'm at what is currently the end game of Hades 2 Early Access. So I could just do a run and make progress, and while it would be a lot of thinking, it would be a type of thinking I enjoy and which is relaxing. Not really relaxing for my hands, but I'm not going to find it mentally overwhelming. So okay, there's a second thing. Just having a variety of games and thinking about what checks which box. But this is hard to do because that means that you need to kind of know what you're getting into when you dip into one of these games. For example, right now I have Loop Hero on deck. This game has been in the pipe for a while for me. I've owned it for a while, and I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy what it's doing or learn from its game design, but I don't know what it is at all. I really don't understand what this game is. I've heard people describe it enough weird ways that I just don't, but I want to be surprised. Another example would be Outer Wilds. Like, I kind of understand what that game is, but exactly what kind of gameplay flow it's going to feel like. Is it going to be more like an exploration focused experience? Is it going to be like a puzzle experience? Is it going to be a story driven experience? I think it's going to be all three of those things. You see what I'm trying to say? It's hard to know which of those categories to fit that game into. So, yeah, I mean, I need some time with that first slot where it's a game you're not up to speed with, where I can leap before I look and just figure out how to fit it into my life a little bit to play stuff, get stuff done. This is why, of course, a lot of people don't play these games, even though they have vastly superior, much more interesting game design most of the time. It's because they're harder to fit into your life. It's harder to like put them somewhere. If you play, you know, the new first person shooter that is the same as a lot of other first person shooters, well, there's a huge benefit to that. You kind of don't need to do this fitting things into your life that much. Well, you just kind of already have a slot for it. You know, every weeknight, you and the lads or whatever, you know, boot up the whatever co-op first person shooter you're playing right now, and they're all similar enough that you don't really need to, you know, worry about it too much. This is not of no value. Like being employed instead of being self employed, there's a great lift of mental burden that has real financial, tangible value. It's not being facetious or belittling people to say that is really very valuable. Sure, if you ask me honestly, most people, are they really reassigning that lack of load elsewhere to like do something with their life? Yeah, maybe not. Okay, fine. But it's not a criticism of the technique in and of itself. Like removing mental load like that is good. I definitely think even just having the game spreadsheet that I made originally just for the audience, so you folks can browse through it and see what did I play this month. If you want to ask about a game in Parlay, you can see when I last played it, like that. Originally, it was just for that. That's all it was, just cataloging games I played for work. I'll tell you, it's really helped me organize and think about the games that I play in a given month. I'm playing more games now, and I didn't incredibly consciously do that. I kind of just cataloged it better, and now suddenly I'm playing more stuff. It's not surprising then that only, 3 or 4 months after I've made that list, I'm coming to you with this topic. What is up with me feeling like it would mentally exhaust me if I dip into these activities, but it kind of doesn't? You could say what's going on is that a mental habit, a defense mechanism, is wearing off. I've kind of solved the underlying problem of figuring out where games will fit in my life, but I just haven't gotten used to it yet mentally. I don't know. I'm smiling a little bit as I'm saying this because I think that is what's going on. So great. I would say in this first half of the parlay, we have a proposed answer, at least for me. It may just be that I needed to fit games into their spots, as we kind of all do. I have a more involved structure of spots because I have a lot of different kinds of shades of game that I'm playing. And I have largely solved that problem, but I just haven't gotten used to my solution to that problem yet. I haven't fully adapted or worn out of the habit of that solution. So, no harm, no foul. No fire. I was trying to say somehow. Maybe it's fine, but I still think that there's the level below is okay. But people perceive games with these involved build systems as being like too much work. They wouldn't find it fun. When the people who enjoy those things don't like, it's not like you don't do a lot of thinking or work as per se organizing your build, but I mean that's part of the game. One of the tenements of my approach to thinking about build systems is a lot of the games industry and a lot of players do not think of making your build on the build screen often before or separate from when you like operate the game. A lot of players do not think of that as being part of the game, but it is. It is, if it is a good build system, it is part of the fun. That is a way to have fun. When you think about it another way, it's kind of ridiculous that that's such a common sentiment, or at least as relatively common as I perceive it to be. When people play Magic the Gathering and organize, their different decks or whatever, or make a deck just for fun, play D&D and imagine a character build maybe they'd enjoy playing. It's a little bit silly to suggest that this isn't a method of playing with the game. It most certainly is. I mean, an enormous majority of the game's design is for that part of the game. In Magic, you could even be cynical and go so far as to say that there isn't actually much to operating many decks after you have built them. They have a syntax of optimal plays and play themselves, but they don't build themselves and they don't build a pilot for themselves. That's the game. And then when you play, you just have to hang tough, like flying an aircraft at high speed. You need to do it by the book. There's a correct way to fly the aircraft, and yet we wouldn't suggest that only flying the aircraft is the important part. Learning to fly it is the majority of the talent that you did. Ideally, when you sit in the aircraft, it's very physically demanding to fly like a high-speed aircraft, but you basically just do a good job following the rules and adapting when you need to, and it will work. You essentially, the mental part of the game was keeping that discipline in the aircraft, of course, and learning to fly it properly. Basically build crafting your, mindset for flying it. This metaphor is sort of weak, but you get the idea, I hope. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't say for any individual person, does getting involved in making builds make you actually exhausted, or is it just mental work that you could enjoy if you just didn't worry about it making you feel tired? I mean, I don't know, but I would say we should go a few levels below and talk about why maybe it's different for me than other people. One of the bad things about me, one of the worst things about me as a build system game discusser is that I have a really good memory for all these minutia in games. I really hate it when games require all that stuff. I'd be tempted to say that if a game makes you learn a ton of little factoids to do its build system, that's just bad. Like that isn't good design. It's inferior design to need to know that. The game ought to help you with knowing those things. Okay, but the situation on the ground is that a huge majority of the games that we have that have interesting build systems do ask you to learn those things. And I pick them up really very quickly. And so I'm kind of deleting a lot of that mental load just through genetics. Like I just got lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, and I can easily pick up that stuff. Again, yes, in the grand scheme of things, I would argue that is kind of a flaw in those games. It isn't a fun thing that you need to know all those things. But in the real world currently, you do usually need to know a lot of minutia like that. You can't just say, well, in a utopia that doesn't exist where we had better game design, this wouldn't be an issue. It's like, okay, but for now it is. I do think that's part of the situation, is that for a lot of people it's just getting, like, learning a new language, getting up to speed with a new way of doing things. Then furthermore, I also think there's a lot of systems of organizing ideas in games build systems that make it a lot easier for me in a way it probably isn't for other people, I would just guess. So this would be things like organizing the way I make builds or different kinds of builds, or having the mindset that different multipliers combining together will probably result in decent damage, and then also having the idea that there's really no point to making different builds unless it's just for fun. And so don't get overly hung up on what's good enough or what the right build is, what the difficulty is. The entire step many people take when they play these games, where they obsessively look online for what the correct builds are which don't exist, I just get to skip every single time, because not only am I just, it's okay to fail in these games. No one's checking to see if you have the right build, like social posturing. It's also true, upon analysis, that in almost all well-designed games, you simply cannot be required to make among the better build choices. There are essentially no games, in my experience, where there are significantly better builds or build options to take, and you must take them. Like that just doesn't exist. The vast majority of the time, anyway. I'm sure there will be exceptions. I would argue they're not ideal. If you're meant to choose, the game should allow you to choose. And my experience has been that, for better or for worse, there's a few different ways this is achieved. But if you play games with these build systems in them, yeah, the vast majority of the time, you will not be required to know some ideal meta build that doesn't even really appreciably exist. A lot of the time, the metagame for a given game and its build systems is actually just the more obvious and broadly applicable strong builds. And there are many other really good builds that are just as good, if not better. There's really no need to build just those. It's just obvious why those became widespread advice. It's certainly much easier to use advice than a lot of other types of builds. But do you at all need to make builds like that? No, and if you did, that would make the entire point of the game moot. That would render the game obsolete almost. If you were a developer of such a game, and there is a meta build that defines how the community plays, that is actually overbearingly the strongest option, not just people have been deceived into thinking it is the best option. I mean, the game is basically rendered pointless unless you relatively nerf it, make it weaker, still good, but not much better than everything else. So yeah, I would be willing to put my money where my mouth is. I think that's, if that does happen, which I'm sure it does in some games, that is just not good game design. And from my experience, I mean, I could give you 36 games right now that have really interesting build systems that do not have that problem. So you absolutely can just drop any game that ever gives you that feeling and have tons of games to play. There really is no need. I guess the functional thing I'm doing here is suggesting, if you are worried about this kind of thing and think these build systems would be overly involved, there certainly exists a body of games already that do not have those problems. You would have to find them and like them, but if you did, you definitely can not worry about this. Get out of the habit, like I have, of feeling overwhelmed, like you will feel overwhelmed by these games in that way. But the problem from before still stands. There are these minutiae or these little things in the game that you do have to kind of learn or get to grips with. And I would say, going even further, I think one of the biggest thorns in my side has been that a lot of games have a kind of verbiage problem. I have been on a big kick this year of talking about how games are kind of pre-psychology a lot of the time. They don't have enough of a bead on what the player is thinking, will be thinking. They do playtesting that it seems to me is a little bit too focused on people kinesthetically playing the game, like what they will do with their body, what they will say doesn't feel good, where there will be a bug in the game, and not enough of the type of playtesting where you follow the player's mindset and do things to kind of head off a problem they're going to have, leading to games that, when you take that philosophy, have, I would argue, fairly obvious mistakes. For example, there's a character in Chrono Arc that I've been playing recently. He's a sniper, and he has this ability where it says if you play two consecutive skills from hand, you mark an enemy, and then if you do another one, he shoots them twice. You get extra damage. So he wants you to do 3 in a row, but some abilities interact with the mark, and that means you do 2 in a row. Play 2 consecutive skills from hand. So, okay, they're trying to evoke that you can't use a character's fixed skill. In Chrono Arc, you can take one of your character's skills and make it available at all times, but that doesn't count. Those don't count as one of the consecutive skills. But consecutive skills, play 2 consecutive skills from hand. So just play any 2 things from hand? Well, I did that, and that doesn't work. I played 2 skills from my hand in a row, 2 consecutive skills from hand, and it didn't work. Now, this has happened to me a lot of times before in other games, so I immediately thought, okay, they've definitely just worded it wrong. It doesn't work the way it says it does. Maybe by consecutive, they're trying to say that you need to play 2 skills from the same character in a row, and so I tried that, and it worked. And they also have to be, like, on an enemy, as far as I'm aware. That's not as clear. And they can't be conjured skills. There are some abilities that will give you you use an ability and it creates illusion swords, and then you can use those as skills, but that doesn't count. The game has, I think, correctly identified that would be unbelievably overpowered with this character. Unbelievably overpowered. That one character and this character would instantly destroy every encounter. That it's very good that doesn't work. But yeah, that doesn't work. And they even put up a little debuff that says, hey, this is a conjured skill, it won't trigger the mark. Great. So it's pretty clear that they just aren't aware that I think for a lot of people, not just me, saying to play 2 consecutive skills from hand does not imply they need to be from the same character, they need to not be fixed skills, they need to not be conjured skills, and they need to target the same enemy. Like that's just not enough to explain how that works, leading to the fact that you cannot use that mechanic unless you do a research project, modest though it is, to figure out how it works. And while this isn't a hugely bad example, I mean, it wasn't that hard to figure out, sure. And you can do this thing multiple times a fight, so you get plenty of time to figure it out. I can think of a lot of games where to actually use a mechanic in the game, you need to go figure out how the mechanic actually works because the game does not say how it works. And obviously there will always be corner cases, but personally I feel like this problem is getting a little out of hand in a lot of games. You can't actually play with most of the game pieces in a lot of games without getting external help to understand what they actually do, basically. Or a good amount of the time I think I've read everything and I know what this effect does, but then something happens and I go, wait, why was that what happened? And only later do I piece through, no, that wasn't a bug, that was just a mechanic that was quite unclear, and it looks like it's this interpretation rather than these other 5 interpretations, Of course, which ones of these will set different people off will vary from person to person. I'm sure that some percentage of people, in that Chrono Arc example, will read that skill or that ability and think, Oh yeah, two consecutive skills like from the same character, you mean. You know what I mean? But I think it's equally likely that just as many players will not understand that from that and will, as modest as it is, need to experiment to make the game even work, basically. I think this adds a lot of mental load. Not only do you need to understand all these mechanics, and I've met plenty of very intelligent people who, when they play games, their instinct is not to read the mechanics. And then they say, I'm confused about how this works. And I say, have you read all of the text about what the mechanic does? And they say, no. And I say, well, that you could start with that, maybe. But that activity is not fun. I don't think that fun. I think it's kind of a pain, and it's, again, usually I would argue kind of a design failure. It's not that the player just has to accept the mental cost of wading through this difficulty. There's not no way that you could remove this negative experience for the player. The game just didn't remove this negative experience for the player. And some of the time, I think that's because it costs a lot of development time to do that. It would be difficult to, put the wiki in the game. Other times, though, like that Chrono Arc wording example, I don't know. I don't really see any reason why it would take more than a coffee break for someone to just maybe think about the wording a little bit more there and make it more clear. Or there already is a video in the game that shows you how the skill works, but it doesn't show you that part of how the skill works. And maybe emphasizing that more would clear it up. Therefore, sure, now they have to go back and take a different video, would take the better part of a day for somebody. But if they had just thought of that in the first place, this would have taken no additional development time to just make it more understandable. Therefore, I think it's fair to say, while it's not the end of the world, it's not a crime. A lot of the case here is the games are just inferior at this, and as the industry gets better at this stuff, it will become easier to pick up and play these games. Basically, I'm saying that while, yeah, you can just like be more comfortable with games build systems, you can just know things that you don't need the most powerful build, that you don't need to find the right build, that basically all well-designed games will allow you to pick whatever you want. You can just know stuff like that and get those concerns out of the way. The other concern, that there's a lot of like minutia to learn and a lot of things that are unclear, you can't just get rid of that on your own, but it will go away on its own over the course of history, like over the next 10 to 20 years. I'm pretty confident that this will become a thing people are more aware of, and it will become gradually less of an issue preventing you from getting into games. I've already seen a rise in the number of games that have a literal wiki in the game. You can right click anything at any time and it just pulls up a literal book that tells you exactly what it does. Usually it's not very much text either. A couple of really good examples are Star Vaders, which is like a turn-based deck builder Space Invaders game. That's very cool. And also Inscription, a roguelike deck builder. You're trapped in a haunted house with a serial killer escape room, and there's more that I won't even spoil for you. It's crazy. Two very good games that I think you should go try that have in them a very comprehensive wiki system. Click anything you don't understand and it just pulls it up right away, and it's not even really complicated. I guess that's the irony, is these games, because they know that the player doesn't want to chew through all this minutia, they kept their mechanics so elegantly simple you almost don't need the wiki in these games, but they put it in anyway because that same design philosophy says go the extra mile, delete as much of that difficulty as possible. We even have examples like Limbus Company, where Mirror Dungeons, the sort of roguelike, you build up a squad as you go, you get upgrade items, and then they reset when you die while you go through a randomly generated dungeon. That mode. Limbus Company has these little story beat things that'll happen. You see a monster at a crossroads and you have to decide what to do. And if you pick like one thing or the other, you might get a certain power-up item, or something bad might happen to your characters or whatever. But they're the same every time, and so you can just look up which one is the best option. Now, the developers realize this and put in text in the game that says, if you pick this option, you get this, ability or whatever. So you don't have to look it up. But that reveals that this entire mechanic is kind of rote. If you know, then it's a waste of time to be clicking through it, because you basically just do get this power-up item. And if you don't know, Well, if you don't live under a rock, you would know that you can just Google it and know. And so you feel bad if you don't stop the game and go Google it. Really, this is just not a great mechanic in 2024. We live in a time period where you can never again not just look things up. And so I feel like that has a place in Mirror Dungeons, but maybe remixing it. It's interesting that they still saw it to be the lesser evil to just tell the player, what each of the options does. I think that's great. I think that is the lesser evil. But anyway, I hope I've convinced you a little bit. This is a trend in the industry. It will get easier over the next, however long to get to grips with these games in a timely manner. It is getting better. I still feel like we've seen a lot of games recently where it's kind of a mixed bag, though. We have games that I think could do a good job, but kind of just don't. For me, Cyberpunk is a pretty glaring example where the build system, even after being refactored, is just complicated in some ways it doesn't need to be, and things kind of come online at weird times, and you can't respec in a game where the entire fantasy is that you can literally remove parts of your body and put new parts on. That's just not that great for no real reason. Like, I don't really know why. It's amazing how good they did with other parts of the game, and then how just like whatever, not terrible, but just inept the build system part is. That's a little discouraging. I feel like it will have been. That's the thing about these build system ideas, right? It doesn't cost anything to just have a better idea of how to implement them. Having your guy who's implementing the trait tree on their coffee break talk to someone who thinks about build systems more and just have a better perspective on it and then implement them better doesn't cost like time or money a lot of the time, and yet leads to a game that is monumentally superior. Whereas to put your cutting edge ray tracing in Cyberpunk, I mean, it costs time and money. You have to spend on that. So I feel bad. I come down so hard on these things in games because, in theory, were the developer in charge of that part of the game to just do their gamer homework a little better, that part of the game would be significantly elevated for no real logistical cost. Like, they would just be a more broadly minded person, and that part of the game would be better, and nobody would have to pay any other cost of any kind, and humanity would just, millions of people would just have a better experience. This is a very large place where humanity can improve the amount of utility that we have, and I'm a nerd about that. So I can, is that so wrong to care about? Anyway. And then there are other examples. Another one I wanted to mention is Balatro. Balatro is not a game I think has at all a bad or badly implemented build system. My beloved unlock all button. You don't feel overwhelmed by the number of options I'm throwing at you? Okay, you can just unlock them all. This game has other progression systems. Go ahead and play with the full set of tools. Great, fantastic. That's and why not? There's no real reason not to in Balatro's design anyway. It's just a way for you to hit a button saying, "Hey, I'm okay with getting myself up to speed with more pieces at once. Let me just go." And the developer says, "Yeah, that makes total sense. Go ahead." But I still think I should, by default, limit players because it might feel overwhelming, and I think that makes sense too. That's a logical conclusion. No, my concern with Balatro is that it brings to light as a very, very popular game with a very elegant piece of game design and a really crispy, I think, very, very nicely fried build system. Delicious katsu crust. I think that it brings to light a problem, which is that if you do realize that you could just calculate out whether you get the amount of points you need to win, a lot of the game's tension would be removed. So when you play Balatro, you're playing like solitaire poker, basically. You play a poker hand, and your jokers, basically the build system of the game, your deck is the build system of the game too, but anyway, to keep it simple, the jokers that you have will multiply aspects of the hand you played and make it score more points, and you have to beat the target amount of points in a certain number of poker hands, or you lose. I mean, it's all mathematical, so you could just do the math if you wanted to. I mean, the game will do the math for you. And if you do the math and it's not enough points, but you can't think of a way to rearrange the jokers that gets you more points, then you like won't get more points. But again, you could just do the math for every combination of jokers that you have available. And I have no doubt that there already is or will be in the future a mod you can install on your copy of Balatro that will just run the numbers for all of the different options you have available and say, hey, rearrange your jokers this way and you will get the most points with this hand. The problem is a lot of the game's game essence and punch, a lot of the excitement of seeing all the points rack up and stuff is ruined if the player, it's hard to say what exactly, knows that they can do that, gives in to the temptation to do that. Yeah, these things. And while I don't think that that's been a huge problem for Balatro, I think for a lot of people it's sufficient. It's a good lesson in game design to see that people will not do that a lot of the time. It's fine. I mean, it's also like it's involved enough math that it feels like a lot of people just don't want to do that or don't feel comfortable doing that. There are other games where I've seen that this temptation kind of gets to people, though. They know that they could know what would be numerically better. And in my eyes, they don't have enough of a value of their own of what would be more important than something numerically better. So they get the game kind of gets swallowed by this interest in what is the single strongest thing. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of people that just enjoy knowing that. Like that, it can be its own puzzle. It can be a lot of fun to figure that out too. But I think there's also a lot of people who are obsessed, very fixated on what is the strongest option, but they don't personally want to care about that. It's just that they don't have any other desire or motivation that is strong enough to counterweight that. They don't. I hate to make it sound like I'm belittling these people. I just want them to care about their own feelings. I feel like they don't believe in their own fun enough. They don't want they don't think it's as good to want the thing they want as it is to have the thing that's just better. They're not willing to look in the face of, oh, but this one just does more damage and say, well, but I just prefer the feeling of this weapon or whatever, so I would prefer to use it. I don't know. I think it's interesting looking at Balatro to see that a lot of people will not fall into that temptation provided it is packaged the right way, basically. Balatro teaches us, therefore, that if you just make it fun, or you could say many reasons why people won't do it in Balatro, you make it uncomfortable enough to do the math, maybe you could say, then people will largely just not worry about it. And maybe when we look at a game like, oh, Warframe, for example, where I feel like the player base has become a bit outsized obsessed with what is, the most time to kill or whatever, the lowest time to kill, when that doesn't actually really matter in the game as a whole, we maybe can take the lesson away that there's probably some other cause. It's not because of the way you calculate that damage. It's something about the way the game frames success, failure, goals like that. It's weird because in Warframe, the benefit of that is more nebulous than in Balatro. You outright lose if you don't have the most points. Whereas in Warframe, I mean, a lot of people haven't done this, but like you could just not have the most damage and it's fine. Is it maybe because Warframe's modding system is more confusing? To some people, or it feels more confusing? Is it because it's a multiplayer game and people are worried that they're harming their squad by not having the most damage? When in fact, modern auto mod system, you just hit the auto mod button in the modding screen in Warframe, does give you like a basically functional build that will give you 80% of your potential damage, thereabouts. All numbers are made up. What is it about that game that is kind of setting people off about that? Basically, this final point is just to say that I think if people could know that they don't need to know, if we could find a way to make game design in a way where people know that they don't need to know what is more or less effective in the game just isn't about that, I think that would go away as well. Okay, fairly successful parlay. In the first half, I talked about why maybe I am hesitant to dig into these more involved games, often because their build system is pretty crunchy. And my conclusion is that I think I've largely solved the problem and I just haven't gotten used to the fact that I have a solution yet. In the second half, I then extrapolated to why maybe other people feel a similar way. There are some more objective difficulties. It's not as much a matter of perspective, I would propose. And there are some things about me that remove some of the problems with current build system design that maybe don't apply to other people. However, I do think a lot of those things are changing. They're on the way out. The industry is getting better at them. Even just in the past 2 or 3 years that I've been covering build system game design on the Zandypants YouTube channel, I feel like I've noticed a significant change in the like competency coherence of games build systems. They're significantly better than they were just 3 years ago, I think. And a lot of the games that I think do it the best of any game I've been exposed to came out during the past 3 years. Your, you know, Hades 2, that's like 4 years. I think Nova Drift does a really good job. Snaker is fairly recent. Chrono Arc certainly just came out. A lot of these games I've mentioned, Limbus Company, Arknights, it didn't come out then, but I think has gotten significantly better at what it's doing in the past few years. So yeah, good news. And there's way more. We could just keep going. Remnant 2. We could just keep going. And so I think it's good news. If this is something that overwhelms you, maybe dip your toe in. If it feels overwhelming to you, obviously stop. Don't let me tell you it shouldn't be overwhelming. That's fine. There are different factors, a lot of which are on the game designers, that, yeah, it makes sense why that would be a lot to chew on. But I would politely suggest keeping an open mind. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems, and you might be able to enjoy kind of mentally chewing on that if you can remove some things that are under your control, like the perspective of feeling like you need a build that is well organized or well thought through, feeling like you don't have the ability to sort of iterate on things as you go. No one's watching, it's fine. You could just make some pile of jank. It's on me a little bit. I'm the one with the YouTube channel where I can talk about this, so I guess I'll get on that. Thank you for the parlay, Hank. And thank you for using this system. Hank actually suggested adding the thought bubbles system, the thing where I propose some prompts that you can use if you don't have an idea for the month. So thank you for suggesting that. I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from it. It's kind of an obvious thing to do, so I feel a bit silly for not doing it. But thank you for suggesting it. I think it's a great thing to have added. And again, folks, feel free to use it in the future. I'll add more prompts if you use up the ones that are there. And you can still request whatever you want with Parley. You just have the option to grab a prompt from me or use a prompt from me as inspiration as well. The whole point is just to have a podcast that you get to nudge in directions that are more interesting to you. How strong you want the nudge to be, that's up to you. You don't have your own idea, big deal. Just pick which one of these you're more interested in. Or maybe they inspire you to have a prompt. Or maybe you have a whole essay that you want me to go through, and I'll do prompts like some of the crazy ones that have been submitted. Some of these are fully formed prompts on their own, basically just a script that I'll read and then respond to. And there's nothing wrong with that either. It's fun to have a mix of all of them, so looking forward to it. Folks, if you want your own parlay like this one, you can get that in the description. Be happy to have you with us. For now, I'll say thanks for watching, thanks for listening, see you next time.